At my son Kevin's wedding dinner, the air still sweet with champagne and false hope, Desmond, my husband of 32 years, stood. His gaze, once so familiar, now held a chilling distance as he met mine. This is the end for us, Darlene. I found someone new. Across from me, Patricia, his secretary, sat with a smug smile that could have graced a lottery winner. Her eyes, bright with triumph, seemed to mock every year of my sacrifice. The entire reception hall, moments ago a symphony of joy and laughter, went utterly silent. Every fork froze midair, suspended in a tableau of shock. Every conversation died, leaving behind an echoing void. My own family, Kevin's beaming grandparents, my sister Margaret, all of them stared at me. Their faces held a raw pity, as if I were a wounded animal they didn't know how to approach, or perhaps didn't want to. But I didn't break. I didn't scream or throw my wine in his face, as I knew everyone secretly expected. Instead, I leaned in, my spine straight, and met Desmond's gaze directly. My voice, when it came, was a calm I didn't know I possessed, a low hum that seemed to cut through the silence. "Well, Desmond," I said, "thanks for the heads up." My hand, steady, found the manila envelope nestled deep in my purse. I'd carried it for weeks, its weight a quiet promise. I slid it across the pristine white tablecloth toward him, the paper whispering against the linen. "Here's a little something for you to read later." Before his fingers, hesitant now, could even touch it, I rose. I smoothed the skirt of my navy blue dress, the one I'd bought specifically for Kevin's beautiful day, for a celebration that had just become my execution. I walked to my son, kissed his forehead, a silent apology for the chaos his father had unleashed. Then, with my head held high, I walked out. The heavy double doors of the reception hall swung shut behind me. A final, definitive click. Behind that door, in the abrupt quiet of the hallway, I heard it. Desmond is tearing open the envelope. Then came the sound that still gives me chills, a raw echo in the quiet corners of my memory. A scream, so loud, so choked with rage and panic, it ripped through that entire banquet hall, reverberating even out here. A primal, wounded sound. That scream meant everything had just changed. Irrevocably. It was the sound of his world collapsing. The truth is, I saw everything. I chose to believe in the man I married, not the one he was slowly, meticulously becoming. In 1991, I was 26, vibrant, full of ambition. My small catering business, Darlene's Delights, thrived from my apartment kitchen. It was soul food, but with a gourmet twist. My grandmother's mac and cheese recipe, elevated with aged cheddar and a whisper of truffle oil, was legendary. People drove across town for my cornbread. My peach cobbler made grown men weep. I had 12 loyal clients and a vibrant dream of opening my own restaurant, a place filled with warmth and good smells. Desmond, a charming insurance adjuster, hired me for his office Christmas party. He swept me off my feet with promises, not just of love, but of a shared future. Talk of building a life together, having children, and creating something beautiful. 6 months later, he proposed. A modest ring, a promise that we would chase our dreams together. My heart, so full, believed every word. Then came the first sacrifice, a subtle erosion of my dreams. His company offered him a promotion requiring a 3-hour move to a bigger city. "It's temporary," he'd assured me, his hands cupping my face, that familiar gesture of absolute trust. just a few years to get established. Then we'll move back, and you can restart your business. I believed him. I loved him. I remember the metallic tang of regret as I packed away my gleaming copper pots, the hum of my industrial mixer falling silent as I sold it off. I said goodbye to my clients, to the familiar rhythm of my kitchen, and followed him to a city where I knew nobody. The restaurant dream, once so vivid, got carefully packed into boxes alongside my grandmother's cast-iron skillets. It was just temporary, I told myself. A small pause for a larger future. Kevin was born 2 years later. A beautiful, unexpected joy, and the second sacrifice. Suddenly, Desmond's career became even more important. We had a family to think about. He worked longer hours, climbing his corporate ladder while I stayed home with our baby boy, pouring all my love and creativity into being the perfect mother. I told myself I'd restart the catering business when Kevin started school. But when Kevin turned 5, Desmond's company restructured, and he took a pay cut. My beloved hobby wasn't practical anymore. We need stability, Darlene. He'd insist whenever I dared mention my business dreams. Kevin needs his college fund. We need the house payment covered. Maybe when things settle down. They never settled. There was always another reason, another excuse, another financial goal that took priority, slowly but surely extinguishing the embers of my own aspirations. So, I found a job at First National Credit Union. My attention to detail and innate people skills made me indispensable. I became the person everyone trusted with their most sensitive financial information. I processed loans, managed accounts, and, unknowingly then, I learned every trick in the book about tracking money and uncovering financial secrets. Those skills, acquired out of necessity, would later save my life. But at the time, they just made me the reliable one, the responsible one, the silent engine that kept everything running smoothly. For 32 years, I supported every single one of Desmond's career moves. When he contemplated switching companies, I helped him polish his resume until it gleamed. When he needed to impress potential clients, I planned dinner parties that left everyone raving. 10 years ago, when he decided to start his own insurance firm, I didn't hesitate. I co-signed the business loan, putting my pristine credit on the line, and worked overtime at the credit union to cover our personal expenses while his nascent business found its footing. I never complained. Not really. I told myself this was what good wives did. They supported their husbands. They put family first. They waited for their turn. I convinced myself that Desmond appreciated my sacrifices, that he saw the immense cost of what I gave up for him and Kevin. When Kevin graduated from high school as valedictorian, I felt a deep, quiet pride, believing my sacrifices had contributed to raising such an amazing young man. When he got into college on a full scholarship, I told myself all those years of putting his needs first had been worth it. Then, Desmond's business finally became profitable enough that we could afford luxuries again, affording a life of comfort. I thought, maybe now, finally, it's my turn. I was 55 years old when I first tentatively brought up restarting my catering business. Now that Kevin's graduated from college and your business is stable, I said over dinner one night, my voice hopeful, I've been thinking about getting back into cooking professionally. Desmond barely looked up from his phone, scrolling through some unseen feed. That's nice. Honey? He mumbled dismissively. But don't you think you're a little old to be starting over? Then, the shift. The first chill wind. Besides, Patricia and I have been talking about expanding the office. We might need your help with the books. Patricia. Even then, her name was coming up more and more in our conversations. His indispensable secretary. So organized, She really understood the business. I should have paid more attention to how his voice softened, how his eyes lingered on her name. But I was too busy being grateful that he finally, trusted me enough to help with his company's finances. I spent the next 2 years doing unpaid bookkeeping for Desmond's burgeoning business, meticulously balancing his ledgers, watching him build something successful, my own dreams. Meanwhile, quietly gathered dust, a silent accusation. I told myself I was being supportive, that marriage was about teamwork, that my time would come. I didn't know that, while I was balancing his books and keeping his business profitable, Patricia was balancing something else entirely. And Desmond had already decided that his future didn't include the woman who'd spent 32 years of her life building his. The first red flag appeared 6 months before Kevin's wedding, hidden in plain sight. A wolf in sheep's clothing. I was organizing our home office, preparing tax documents for our accountant, when I found a credit card statement that didn't belong with our usual stack of bills. A Chase Sapphire Reserve Premium card, with a $15,000 credit limit. Account holder, Desmond Johnson. My hands trembled as I opened it. Charges for restaurants I'd never been to, jewelry stores I'd never heard of, weekend trips to hotels and cities Desmond had never mentioned visiting for business. The statement showed a balance of $8,000, money that wasn't coming from our joint checking account. A cold knot formed in my stomach. When I confronted him that evening, Desmond barely looked up from his laptop. Business expenses. Honey, he said with that dismissive tone he'd perfected over the years. Client entertainment. Networking events. Patricia handles all the paperwork for reimbursements. Patricia again. Always Patricia these days. But why a separate card? I pressed, my voice steadier than I felt. Why not use our business account? Tax purposes. He replied smoothly. A practiced evasion. Our accountant suggested it. Don't worry about it, Darlene. You handle the home finances. I handle the business stuff. That should have been the end of it. The old me, the trusting Darlene, would have accepted his explanation and gone back to believing blindly. But 30 years at the credit union had taught me that financial secrets always tell the truth. And this statement was screaming lies. So, I started paying attention. Really paying attention. I noticed how Desmond's phone was always face down now, like a guilty secret. How he'd step outside to take certain calls, his voice low and secretive. How he developed a sudden, inexplicable interest in working late on Fridays and weekends. I watched him shower longer, use cologne on random Tuesday mornings, and spend 20 minutes styling his hair for client meetings. The second discovery came 3 weeks later. I decided to drop off lunch at his office. A surprise visit with his favorite sandwich from the deli down the street. Patricia wasn't at her desk in the reception area. I could hear laughter coming from Desmond's private office. Female laughter. Intimate, shared laughter. I stood there in that reception area for 5 minutes. The scent of his favorite sandwich growing cold in the bag. Listening to my husband's voice mixing with hers. It twisted my stomach inside out. They weren't discussing insurance policies or client portfolios. They were discussing weekend plans, private jokes, and intimate moments that had nothing to do with business. When they finally emerged from his office, Patricia's lipstick was smudged, a smear of careless passion, and Desmond's tie was crooked, hastily adjusted. They both froze when they saw me standing there, a pathetic wife playing delivery service. Darlene. Desmond's voice was too bright, too surprised. A thin veneer over guilt. What brings you here? Brought your lunch. I managed, setting the bag on Patricia's desk. Thought you might be hungry. Patricia, ever the viper, smoothed her skirt and smiled at me with pure venom, disguised as sweetness. "That's so thoughtful," she purred. "Desmond's lucky to have someone who takes such good care of him." The way she said, "takes care of him," made it clear she thought my job was menial, temporary, and easily replaceable. I smiled back, a mask of calm, and left without another word. But inside, something fundamental had shifted. The naive wife was gone. I started documenting everything. Every late night, every unexplained absence, every time he claimed to be working, but his office lights were off when I drove by. I used my lunch breaks to follow him sometimes. A shadow. And what I saw confirmed my worst fears. Desmond and Patricia holding hands in dimly lit restaurant booths across town, kissing in his car in empty parking lots, shopping together at jewelry stores where he'd never taken me, not even for our anniversary. Piece by painful piece, my world shattered. But the worst discovery was yet to come. 2 months before the wedding, I was meticulously balancing our joint checking account when I noticed irregular transfers. Small amounts at first, $500 here, $800 there, steadily moving out of our savings into an account I didn't recognize. The reference numbers, seemingly innocuous, led me down a rabbit hole that made my blood run cold. Using my access at the credit union, my professional expertise, I traced those transfers. They led to a secret account Desmond had opened 18 months earlier. An account with both his name and Patricia's name on it. An account that contained over $40,000 of our money. Money he'd been systematically stealing from our retirement savings, penny by penny, to fund his affair. Jewelry purchases for Patricia. Weekend getaways to mountain resorts. A down payment on an apartment lease in her name. Expensive dinners. Designer clothes. Spa treatments. He was literally paying for his new life. Their new life. With the money I'd helped save for our old age. The paper trail painted a picture so clear it left no room for doubt. This wasn't some fleeting midlife crisis or a momentary lapse in judgment. This was a calculated betrayal, meticulously planned and executed over months, while I slept next to him every night, trusting him with my whole heart. I printed every statement, photographed every receipt, and documented every single lie. My credit union training had taught me that financial evidence doesn't lie. People do. But numbers tell stories that can't be denied or explained away. Sitting in my car outside that bank, holding a manila folder heavy with the irrefutable proof that my entire marriage was a fraud, I felt something I'd never experienced before. Not just heartbreak or anger, though they pulsed beneath the surface. It was a cold, clear certainty about what needed to happen next. Desmond thought he was smart, covering his tracks with separate accounts and secret credit cards. He'd forgotten one crucial detail. He was stealing from a woman who spent 30 years learning how to follow money trails and uncover financial deception. He had just handed me all the ammunition I needed to destroy him. Instead of confronting him directly, letting him witness my pain, I decided to let him hang himself with his own rope. My first instinct, visceral and raw, was to burst into his office and throw those bank statements in his smug face, to scream and cry and make him feel every ounce of devastation he had inflicted. But 30 years of marriage had taught me something valuable about my husband. Desmond always underestimated me. He saw me as the quiet, dependable wife who'd never cause a scene, never fight back, never do anything that might embarrass him publicly. And for the first time in our marriage, I realized his assumptions about me could become his greatest weakness. Sitting in my car that day, surrounded by the cold, hard evidence of his betrayal, I made a decision that would change everything. I wasn't going to give him the satisfaction of seeing me broken. I wasn't going to hand him the perfect excuse to paint me as the hysterical, vindictive ex-wife who couldn't handle being replaced by a younger woman. Instead, I was going to use every advantage I had against him. And the beautiful, poetic irony was that Desmond himself had given me the most powerful weapon of all, the prenuptial agreement. I'd almost forgotten about it until I was reorganizing our file cabinet, searching for the deed to our house. There it was, tucked neatly between our insurance policies and Kevin's birth certificate. 32 pages of legal protection that Desmond had insisted on after his first marriage ended badly. I'm not going through that financial nightmare again, he'd told me during our engagement, his first wife's expensive divorce still fresh in his memory. This protects both of us, Darlene. It's just smart planning. I'd signed it without truly reading it, trusting him completely, believing that our love would last forever, and those legal documents would never matter. Young love makes you do foolish things, like sign contracts you don't fully understand. But now, staring at those yellowed, forgotten pages, I needed to know exactly what I'd agreed to 32 years ago. That's when I called Sarah Martinez. Sarah had been my college roommate, the smartest woman I knew, who'd gone on to become a family law attorney specializing in high-asset divorces. We'd stayed in touch over the years, meeting for lunch whenever her schedule allowed, sharing stories about our kids and our marriages. Darlene. Sarah's voice was surprised when she answered my call. This is unexpected. How are you doing? I need legal advice, I said, without preamble, my voice tight. And I need absolute confidentiality. The silence stretched for several seconds, Sarah processing the gravity in my tone. She was sharp enough to understand that this wasn't a casual call about updating our wills. Come to my office tomorrow, she said finally, her voice firm. Bring whatever documents you have. The next morning, I sat across from Sarah in her elegant downtown law office, watching her face change as she read through my prenuptial agreement. Her expression shifted from professional interest to genuine surprise, then to something that looked almost like admiration. Darlene, she said finally, setting the papers down and leaning back in her chair. Do you understand what you have here? A prenup that protects his assets, I replied, unsure why she looked so pleased, almost gleeful. Much more than that, Sarah said, flipping to page 23 and pointing to a specific clause. This is a faithfulness provision. Your husband insisted on including language that voids most of the asset protection if either party commits adultery during the marriage. My heart stopped completely, then began to pound. What does that mean? I whispered. It means, Sarah continued, her voice growing more excited, that if you can prove Desmond has been unfaithful, this prenuptial agreement becomes worthless. All those protections he put in place to safeguard his business and investments, they disappear the moment he violates his marriage vows. The irony was so perfect, so deliciously precise, it almost made me laugh. Desmond's paranoia about his first wife's betrayal had led him to create a legal trap for his own infidelity. How much proof do I need? I asked, thinking about the manila folder full of damning evidence sitting in my car. Sarah smiled like a shark sensing blood in the water. Bank records showing he used marital assets to fund an affair would be excellent. Photos of them together would be helpful. Any evidence of cohabitation or joint financial accounts would be devastating. I had all of that and more. There's something else, Sarah said, flipping through more pages. Because you co-signed the business loan and worked unpaid for his company for so long, you're entitled to compensation for your contributions. Combined with the adultery clause, you're looking at keeping the house, most of the investments, and potentially significant alimony. For the first time in months, I felt genuine hope spreading through my chest, a warmth cutting through the bitter cold. But here's the key, Sarah continued, her gaze direct. You need to file first. Don't give him time to hide assets or prepare a defense. Strike quickly and decisively. That afternoon, I began preparing for war. Desmond wanted to humiliate me at our son's wedding. He wanted to flaunt his affair in front of our family and friends, to reduce me to ashes publicly. Perfect. Let him think he held all the cards. Let him believe he'd outmaneuvered the simple little wife who'd never caused him a moment's trouble. Because while he was planning his grand public announcement, I was planning something far more devastating. I was going to let him destroy himself in front of everyone who mattered. And then I was going to hand him the legal consequences of his choices, wrapped up in a neat little envelope. The best part was that everything I was about to do to him was completely legal, completely justified, and completely his own fault. Desmond had spent 32 years underestimating me. He was about to learn exactly how expensive that mistake would be. The hardest part wasn't gathering evidence, or meticulously planning my legal strategy, or even confronting the ugly truth of my ruined marriage. It was pretending. For 6 weeks leading up to Kevin's wedding, I had to perform the role of my life, the devoted, naive, trusting wife. The one who suspected nothing, questioned nothing, who would never, ever dream of fighting back. Every morning, I made Desmond's coffee exactly the way he liked it, dark and strong. The ritual, a bitter parody. I kissed him goodbye, his lips cold and distant, and wished him well at work. Every evening, I asked about his day and listened to his carefully constructed lies about late meetings and difficult clients. When he claimed he'd be working weekends, I packed him lunch, his favorite sandwich, and told him not to work too hard. The performance required every ounce of self-control I possessed, a suffocating burden. When he came home smelling like Patricia's cloying perfume, a scent I now recognized with sickening precision, I bit my tongue and said nothing. When he forgot our 32nd anniversary for the first time in our marriage, I pretended it didn't matter, though a fresh wound opened in my heart. When he started working out obsessively and buying new, stylish clothes, I complimented his dedication to staying healthy, my words tasting like ash. Most challenging of all was acting surprised and grateful when he offered to pay for Kevin's wedding reception. "I know money's been tight with the wedding expenses," he said one evening, barely looking up from his phone, his voice a feigned generosity. "Why don't I cover the dinner? It's my son's big day." What he didn't know was that I'd already seen the credit card statements. He wasn't being generous. He was planning something. The reception, I realized with a chilling clarity, was the perfect venue for maximum humiliation. A captive audience of family and friends who would witness my public destruction. "That's so thoughtful," I replied, playing my part perfectly, the obedient wife. "Kevin will be thrilled. Should I handle the arrangements?" "Actually," Desmond said, and I caught the slight, triumphant smile playing at his lips. "Let me take care of this one. I want everything to be perfect." Perfect for what? I wondered, a cold certainty settling in. But I nodded and smiled like the obedient wife he thought he'd married, my heart a stone. While Desmond meticulously planned his grand finale, I was orchestrating something far more devastating, a silent, unseen countermove. Sarah had filed my divorce papers that morning, before the sun had fully risen, a secret promise of freedom. But they wouldn't be served until after the wedding. I didn't want anything to spoil Kevin's beautiful day. Nor did I want to tip off Desmond before he'd fully committed to his public humiliation. The manila envelope became my constant companion, a heavy, comforting presence in my purse. I carried it everywhere, sometimes just touching it through the leather, a tangible reminder that I held all the power. Inside were copies of the divorce papers, the irrefutable adultery evidence, the bank statements showing his systematic theft, and a detailed accounting of every asset he thought he'd protected with that precious prenuptial agreement. 3 days before the wedding, Desmond made his final, fatal mistake. "Darlene," he said over dinner, his voice taking on that patronizing tone I'd learned to loathe. "I need to tell you something about the reception." I looked up from my plate, channeling every ounce of innocent curiosity I could muster. My face, a perfect mask. "What about it?" "I've invited Patricia," he said, watching my face carefully, expecting a reaction, a flicker of pain. "She's been such a huge help with the business, and I thought it would be nice to include her in the celebration." The sheer audacity of it took my breath away for a moment. He was bringing his mistress to our son's wedding, setting the stage for maximum cruelty, and he wanted my permission first. The old Darlene would have questioned it, perhaps even objected, collapsing into tears. But the new Darlene, the one who'd been planning her revenge for weeks, simply smiled. "Of course," I said, my voice sweet as poison. "That's very thoughtful. She's been working so hard." Desmond's face showed a flicker of surprise, as if he'd expected more resistance, a more dramatic breakdown. But then his expression settled into smug satisfaction. He thought he'd broken me down so completely that I wouldn't even fight for my own dignity. "Good," he said, a self-congratulatory nod. "I knew you'd understand." That night, I finalized every minute detail of my plan. The envelope was prepared, its contents sealed. The legal papers are filed and ready. The evidence was organized and documented, each piece a nail in his coffin. I even practiced my response in the mirror, perfecting the calm, graceful demeanor that would throw everyone off balance, that would shatter his expectations. Because I'd realized something crucial about revenge. The sweetest kind comes not from losing your temper, from emotional outbursts, but from maintaining perfect control while your enemy, blinded by their own hubris, destroys themselves. The morning of Kevin's wedding, I woke up feeling something I hadn't experienced in months. Genuine peace. A quiet, resolute strength. I put on my navy blue dress, the one that made me feel confident and powerful, and did my makeup with extra care. Today wasn't just my son's wedding day. It was the day I reclaimed my life. Desmond was unusually cheerful as we got ready, humming while he shaved, taking extra time with his appearance. He thought today was his victory lap, the day he'd finally rid himself of the boring wife who'd served her purpose and could now be discarded for a newer, shinier model. At the reception, I watched him whisper something to Patricia that made her laugh, probably discussing how easy this was going to be, how I'd never see it coming. I smiled and waved at them across the room, playing my part until the very last moment. When Desmond stood up to make his announcement, when he looked at me with that mixture of pity and cruelty in his eyes, when he delivered his rehearsed speech about our marriage being over, I felt nothing but cold satisfaction. He thought he was about to destroy me. Instead, he just walked directly into the trap I'd spent 6 weeks preparing. Every word he spoke, every cruel revelation, every moment of public humiliation he inflicted on me in front of our family, only made the contents of that envelope more devastating. Because while Desmond had been planning a public execution, I'd been preparing a resurrection that would leave him screaming. When he opened that envelope, his whole world collapsed in real time, and I got to watch every beautiful, excruciating second of it unfold. I was halfway to the parking lot, the night air cool on my skin, when I heard it. A roar of pure rage and panic that cut through the evening air like a wounded animal. Through the reception hall's floor-to-ceiling windows, I could clearly see Desmond. He stood at our table, the manila envelope torn open in his hands, papers scattered across the white tablecloth like fallen leaves. His face had drained of every drop of color. The confident, smug expression he'd worn during his announcement was gone, replaced by something I'd never seen before. Genuine terror. His hands shook uncontrollably as he rifled through the documents, his eyes scanning the legal papers with growing horror. Patricia leaned forward, trying to read over his shoulder, her perfectly manicured fingers reaching, grasping for the divorce papers. "Desmond, what is this?" she asked, her voice cutting through the stunned silence that had fallen over the reception hall. But Desmond couldn't speak. He was staring at the bank statements I'd included, the ones showing every penny he'd systematically stolen from our joint accounts, every dollar he'd transferred to their secret account, every purchase he'd made for her with money that belonged to both of us. The evidence was irrefutable, undeniable. "Desmond." Patricia's voice was sharper now, more demanding, tinged with a dawning fear. She grabbed one of the papers from his trembling hands and began to read. I watched through the window as her expression changed from confusion to disbelief, then to cold, calculating panic. She was reading the adultery clause in our prenuptial agreement, the clause that voided all of Desmond's financial protections the moment he committed adultery. The clause that meant everything he thought he'd safeguarded for their future together was now mine to claim. "This cannot be real," Patricia said, her voice loud enough that the nearest tables could hear every word. A desperate plea to the universe. "You said she would never fight back. You said she was too weak, too dependent." The words hung in the air, a chilling confirmation of everything I'd suspected about their conversations. They'd sat in that secret apartment I'd helped pay for, mocking me, planning my humiliation, convinced that I was too broken down, too pathetic to defend myself. Desmond finally found his voice, but it came out as a strangled whisper that gradually built to a frantic shout. "She knew." He choked out, looking around wildly. "She knew everything. She's been planning this." The family members at nearby tables were starting to understand that something terrible was happening, the pieces of the puzzle clicking into place. Kevin stood up from the head table, his face a mixture of confusion and concerned anger. "Dad, what's going on?" But Desmond was beyond caring about appearances now. He held up the divorce papers, his voice cracking with desperation. "She filed for divorce this morning. She's claiming adultery. She's trying to take everything." "Take everything." Patricia's voice was rising to match his, pure terror now. "What do you mean? Take everything? You said the prenup protected your assets?" "The prenup is void," Desmond screamed, loud enough that the entire reception hall fell silent once more. A terrified hush. "The adultery clause voids the whole thing. She gets the house. The investments? Everything." I watched Patricia's face cycle through a series of raw emotions, shock, anger, and then something that looked disturbingly like cold, calculating avarice. She wasn't devastated that their affair had been exposed. She was furious that the money, her future money, was gone. "You told me she was filing taxes," Patricia hissed, venomous. "You said she was too stupid to understand finances. You said she'd never figure out the account. The account. Their secret account." She was talking about it right there in front of everyone, openly confirming every suspicion our family had ever had about their sordid relationship. Kevin was on his feet now, his new wife, Sarah, beside him, both of them staring at Desmond with growing horror. My sister Margaret had her hand clamped over her mouth, tears streaming down her face, a silent testament to the pain. Sarah's parents looked mortified, wishing to disappear into the floor. But Desmond and Patricia were too caught up in their own panic to care about the audience they'd created. They were turning on each other like cornered animals, each trying to blame the other for their ruined predicament. "You said you had everything under control," Patricia shouted, pointing an accusatory finger. "You said she was broken, that she'd never fight back." "I thought she was Brees," Desmond shot back, his voice raw. She never questioned anything. She never even looked at the statements. Well, clearly she looked. Patricia's voice was pure venom now, laced with frantic fear. And now what? Now we have nothing. The apartment lease is in my name. The credit cards are maxed out. You said you were going to take care of everything. The ugly, unvarnished truth was spilling out for 40 witnesses. They weren't star-crossed lovers torn apart by cruel circumstances. They were two greedy, self-serving people who'd planned to steal my life and got caught. She froze the accounts. Desmond said, reading more of the legal papers, his voice hollow. Everything's frozen pending the divorce proceedings. We cannot access anything. Patricia stood up so fast her chair toppled backward with a clatter. Cannot access anything? What about the apartment? What about my car payment? What about— She stopped mid-sentence, the full reality hitting her at once, like a physical blow. Without access to Desmond's money, my money that he'd been stealing, she had nothing. Her lavish lifestyle, her illusion of security, her future with him. All of it depended on funds that no longer existed. The look she gave Desmond in that moment was pure, unadulterated hatred, cold and absolute. You destroyed everything, she said, her voice like winter ice. You absolute fool. And then she walked out. Just like that. No goodbye. No attempt to work through the crisis together. No declaration of love that would survive financial hardship. She simply grabbed her purse and left Desmond standing there, alone, with the wreckage of his choices. The silence that followed was deafening. 40 people stared at my husband as he stood among the scattered papers of his destruction, finally understanding that the quiet, dependable wife he'd underestimated had just checkmated him with his own moves. Kevin's voice cut through the silence, quiet but carrying clearly across the room. Dad, how could you do this to Mom? But Desmond had no answer. He was still staring at the legal papers, still trying to process that the woman he dismissed as weak and stupid had just destroyed him so completely that even his mistress had abandoned him. That's when he started screaming my name. Darlene, Darlene. His voice cracked as he shouted my name across the parking lot, echoing off the silent cars. Get back here. We need to talk. I stopped walking and turned around slowly, deliberately, taking my time. Through the reception hall's floor-to-ceiling windows, I could see the chaos inside. Overturned chairs, scattered papers, family members huddled in shocked conversations, and my husband standing in the middle of it all like a man whose house was burning down around him. When I walked back through those doors, the entire room fell silent again. A hushed expectation. 40 pairs of eyes followed my movements as I made my way calmly, with a strange sense of purpose, back to our table, where Desmond stood, surrounded by the evidence of his betrayal. You wanted to talk, I said, my voice carrying clearly in the hushed room, a quiet assertion of control. Let us talk. Desmond's face was red and blotchy, his perfect hair disheveled from running his hands through it in desperation. The confident man who'd made his announcement 20 minutes earlier was gone, replaced by someone desperate and panicked. You cannot do this, he said, his voice shaking with a pathetic plea. Not like this. Not in front of everyone. I looked around the room at our family and friends, people who'd known us for decades, who'd celebrated our anniversary parties and holiday dinners, who'd believed we had a solid, loving marriage. You chose the venue, I said simply, a cold truth. I thought you wanted everyone to witness your big announcement. Kevin approached our table, his face pale but determined, his eyes filled with a new, somber understanding. Mom, what's going on? Dad's saying you filed for divorce. I nodded, reaching into my purse for the folder I'd prepared for this exact moment. I filed this morning. Honey, I'm sorry you had to find out this way. But your father made that choice when he decided to destroy our marriage at your wedding dinner. This is insane, Desmond said, grabbing my arm, his fingers tight and desperate. You're being vindictive. You're trying to ruin me over some midlife crisis. I looked down at his hand on my arm, then back up at his desperate, pleading face. Remove your hand, I said quietly, my voice utterly calm, unyielding. Something in my tone made him let go immediately, his fingers recoiling. Midlife crisis. I opened my folder and pulled out the bank statements, holding them up, each page a testament to his deceit. Is that what you call stealing $40,000 from our retirement account to fund your affair? A collective gasp rippled through the room. My sister Margaret stepped closer, her eyes wide as she looked at the damning papers in my hands. You've been tracking our accounts. Desmond's voice was getting higher, more desperate, verging on a whine. That's an invasion of privacy? That's my job. I interrupted, cutting him off cleanly. I work at a credit union. Remember? Tracking financial irregularities is literally what I do for a living. Sarah Martinez chose that exact moment to walk through the reception hall doors, a vision of professional calm. I'd asked her to come, knowing I might need legal backup for this conversation. Mrs. Johnson, Sarah said, approaching our table with a composed demeanor. I hope I'm not interrupting anything important. Perfect timing, I said, a slight, cold smile touching my lips. Sarah, this is my husband. Desmond. Desmond, this is Sarah Martinez, my attorney. The last vestiges of color drained from Desmond's face again. Attorney? You hired an attorney without telling me. The same way you opened secret bank accounts without telling me. I replied, my voice flat. Sarah, would you mind explaining to my husband what happens when someone violates the adultery clause in their prenuptial agreement? Sarah smiled, not warmly, but with professional satisfaction, a quiet, knowing glint in her eyes. Certainly, Mr. Johnson. When you signed your prenuptial agreement 32 years ago, you thoughtfully included a faithfulness provision. This clause specifically voids most of your asset protections in the event of adultery. Your wife, Darlene, has meticulously documented evidence of your affair, including financial records showing you systematically used marital assets to support another woman. That cannot be legal, Desmond said, but his voice had lost all its fight, reduced to a desperate whimper. It's completely legal, Sarah continued, her voice clear and precise. In fact, it's exactly what you designed it to be. The prenup was your idea, your language, your protection. You just never imagined it would be used against you. Kevin was reading over the bank statements now, his expression growing darker with each line, each damning detail. Dad, you stole from Mom's retirement account. You used her money to pay for your affair. It's not theft, Desmond said weakly, grasping at straws. It's marital property. I had every right. You had every right to use our joint funds to buy jewelry for another woman, I asked, my voice cutting through his feeble excuses. To pay for weekend trips I knew nothing about? To put a down payment on an apartment for your secretary? The room was so quiet you could hear people breathing, the weight of his betrayal suffocating. Uncle James was shaking his head in disgust. Sarah's parents looked mortified to be witnessing this public family implosion. Where's Patricia now? I asked, looking around the stunned room, a cold note of irony in my voice. Your partner in this grand romance? The woman who was going to make you so much happier than I ever could. Desmond's silence was answer enough. She left, Kevin said quietly. his voice filled with a profound disappointment. The minute she realized the money was gone, she walked out. I nodded, a grim satisfaction settling in. That tells you everything you need to know about what your relationship was truly built on. Darlene? Please, Desmond said, and for the first time, his voice held genuine desperation rather than anger. A broken plea. We can work this out. We can go to counseling. I made a mistake, but we can fix this. I looked at this man I'd been married to for 32 years. This stranger who'd systematically betrayed and stolen from me while I slept beside him every night. I felt nothing but cold, unyielding certainty. You're right about one thing, I said, my voice firm. You did make a mistake. You assumed I was too weak, too stupid, and too dependent to fight back. You assumed wrong. I gathered my papers, securing them back in my folder. The accounts are frozen until the divorce is finalized. You'll be hearing from my attorney about the asset division and the theft charges we're considering filing. As I turned to leave, Desmond made one last desperate attempt, a final grasping for control. You cannot take everything. I built that business. I earned that money. I stopped and looked back at him one final time, my gaze unwavering. With my credit, my unpaid labor, and my financial support, I said, each word a hammer blow. And now you're going to learn exactly what that was worth. Walking out of that reception hall for the second time, the night air a balm on my skin, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. A lightness, a profound sense of complete and total control over my own life. Behind me, I could still hear Desmond trying to explain himself to our son, still trying to minimize what he'd done, still trying to play the victim. But nobody was listening anymore. Their attention, once solely on him, had irrevocably shifted. 6 months later, on what would have been our 33rd anniversary, I was standing in the warm, fragrant kitchen of my new catering business, proudly named Darlene's Second Chances. I was meticulously preparing my grandmother's famous peach cobbler, its sweet aroma filling the air, for a client's golden anniversary party. The irony wasn't lost on me. Celebrating 50 years of genuine, enduring love, while my own marriage had crumbled after 32 years of carefully constructed lies. The divorce had been finalized 3 weeks earlier, and the results were even better than Sarah had predicted. The adultery clause in Desmond's precious prenuptial agreement had worked exactly as written, voiding every protection he'd thought he'd secured. I kept the house, 75% of our investments, the retirement accounts he'd tried to steal from, and received substantial spousal support for the next 5 years. Enough to ensure my financial independence. But the real victory wasn't just financial. It was watching the dominoes of his carefully constructed deception fall, one by one. Patricia had lasted exactly 2 weeks after the wedding disaster. Once she realized that Desmond's money was truly gone and wouldn't be coming back, she cleaned out their secret apartment, taking everything, and moved in with another man before the month even ended. Word through mutual acquaintances was that her new boyfriend was a cardiologist with a much larger bank account and, conveniently, no inconvenient wives to complicate things. Desmond had tried to fight the divorce at first, hiring an expensive attorney. But that attorney, a shrewd professional, had taken one look at the prenuptial agreement, the bank statements showing systematic theft, the photographs of him with Patricia, and the undeniable paper trail of lies. He had wisely advised Desmond to settle quickly. His case was impossible to defend. The business he'd been so proud of, the one I'd helped build, was struggling now. Without my unpaid bookkeeping and meticulous financial management, and with his reputation in tatters after word spread about the affair and the theft, clients had started looking elsewhere for their insurance needs. He'd been forced to sell his share to his business partner, just to pay his mounting legal fees. The potential fraud charges Sarah had mentioned never materialized. I decided that utterly destroying his life, his standing, his very self-worth, was enough. Sending him to prison wasn't necessary. Sometimes, mercy looks like letting someone face the natural, inevitable consequences of their own choices without adding extra punishment. Kevin had struggled profoundly with the revelation about his father, grappling with the betrayal. But he'd made his position clear the week after the wedding. "Mom," he'd said, sitting in my newly organized kitchen while I made him his favorite chocolate chip cookies, his voice heavy with regret. "I'm so sorry I didn't see what he was doing to you. I'm sorry it took so long for someone to stand up for you. That was never your job, honey," I told him gently. My son had inherited my fierce sense of justice and his father's stubborn streak, but he directed it in the right direction. He cut contact with Desmond entirely after learning about the stolen retirement money, saying simply that he couldn't respect a man who'd steal from his own wife, his own family. Sarah, my new daughter-in-law, had become one of my closest allies, a true friend. She had helped me design a beautiful logo for my catering business, a phoenix rising from flames, and had been my first official client, hiring me to cater her law firm's holiday party. Word of mouth from that successful event had led to 3 more bookings, then 5, then 10. Darlene's Second Chances was everything I dreamed it would be 30 years ago, and more. I specialized in Southern comfort food with elegant presentation, the kind of cooking that made people feel loved and celebrated, healed by good food. My peach cobbler had become legendary among my clients. My mac and cheese was booked solid through the spring. I'd even started offering cooking classes on weekends for people who wanted to learn my techniques, sharing the joy I'd almost lost. But the best part wasn't the success or the money, or even the profound satisfaction of building something beautiful with my own hands. The best part was waking up every morning knowing that every choice I made was mine. Every dollar I earned was mine. And every dream I pursued belonged to me alone, unburdened, uncompromised. I'd learned something profound about myself in those months of planning my revenge, in the quiet solitude of my truth. Patience and intelligence will always defeat impulse and emotion. Desmond had acted from greed and selfishness, making impulsive decisions based on what he wanted in the moment, blind to the future. I'd acted from strategy and self-respect, building a plan that would protect my future rather than just satisfy my immediate anger. The fundamental difference between us was that he'd seen our marriage as something to escape from, a burden to shed, while I'd seen it as something worth fighting for, worth investing in, until the moment he conclusively proved it wasn't worth saving. 3 weeks ago, I received a phone call from Desmond. He was living in a studio apartment across town, working for someone else's insurance agency, and apparently feeling profoundly sorry for himself. "Darlene," he'd said, his voice smaller than I'd ever heard it, stripped of all arrogance. "I made terrible mistakes. I know I cannot undo what I did, but maybe we could talk. Maybe there's some way to fix this, to go back." I'd listened to his entire speech, his hollow apologies, his transparent excuses, his desperate promises that he'd changed. When he finished, I said only one thing: "I hope you find happiness, Desmond, but you will not find it with me." That was the last conversation we'd ever had. Now, putting the finishing touches on my client's anniversary dessert, carefully placing a sprig of mint, I reflected on how much my life had transformed. I owned a successful business, lived in a beautiful home that was entirely mine, and woke up every day excited about the limitless possibilities ahead of me. I had my son's unconditional love and profound respect, genuine friendships with people who valued me for who I was, and dreams that belonged to nobody but me. If you're watching this and feel betrayed by someone you trusted, remember this. Sometimes the best revenge is not getting even. It's getting free. Sometimes the greatest victory is not destroying your enemy, but building a life so beautiful, so authentic, that their betrayal becomes the catalyst for your greatest happiness. Use their own weapons against them if you must, but do not let their choices define your future. The person who betrayed you showed you exactly who they are. Believe them, learn from it, and then build something immeasurably better without them. I never could have imagined that the worst day of my marriage would become the first day of my real life. But that's exactly what happened when my husband announced our ending at our son's wedding dinner, and I handed him an envelope that changed everything. Sometimes justice tastes like peach cobbler, smells like your own kitchen, and sounds like your own laughter echoing through a home that finally belongs to you.